Welcome to Thrive at the Top, the podcast for leaders, safety professionals, and decision makers navigating high pressure industries and are done with surface level solutions. Here, we talk about the realities of human performance, psychological safety, resilience, and what it actually takes to sustain people and performance in complex operational environments. I'm Mabel Munyamani, the founder of Complete Wellbeing Global and the creator of the Safe Pillars Framework. We help organizations strengthen human performance, operational resilience, and disclosure readiness in high pressure environments. Today, we're continuing in our series of Inside the Infrastructure. And today, we're on episode 6, Why Training Alone Doesn't Change Culture. And today, I want to talk about training because organizations spend a lot of money training people. Mental health awareness training, psychological safety training, leadership development, resilience, fatigue, human factors, communication. And what I want to be very clear from the beginning, training matters. We provide training ourselves at Complete Wellbeing Global. I have spent years educating leaders and workforces about mental health, psychological safety, and human performance. I've seen those moments when somebody suddenly understands something they didn't understand before. I've seen leaders realize that something they thought was a performance problem may actually have been a person struggling. I've also seen people recognize signs in themselves and say, actually, maybe I need some support. Education can absolutely change people. But I've also learned something else. What happens after the training matters just as much as the training itself. Because you can train 500 leaders on psychological safety on Monday, but what happens on Tuesday morning when somebody actually speaks up? That's where culture starts showing what it really is. Someone can sit through a 2-hour workshop and learn exactly how to respond when an employee says they're struggling. They can know what to say. They can understand the importance of listening. They can understand confidentiality. They can understand referral pathways. They can leave that room genuinely wanting to do better. Then they go back into an environment where they're responsible for a team that's understaffed. Targets still have to be met. Operational pressure hasn't changed. They're managing competing priorities. Their own leader is pushing for results. And suddenly somebody says, I'm really struggling at the moment. Now the training is being tested in a real operating environment. Does the manager have time to stop? Do they feel confident having this conversation? Do they know what happens after disclosure? Does the organization's process support what they have been taught? Do they believe they'll be supported if accommodating that employee affects an operational target? This is where training either becomes behavior or slowly disappears. And this is something I think organizations sometimes underestimate. People don't work inside training rooms. They work inside systems, inside rosters, inside reporting structures, policies, targets, workloads, leadership behaviors, team dynamics, operational pressures. All of these conditions influence whether somebody can actually apply what they have learned. So when we talk about culture change, we have to look beyond the training itself. We have to look at the conditions the person returns to. Let me give you a very simple example. Imagine we've trained leaders to encourage people to speak up early when fatigue is affecting their performance. We've told the workforce, please speak up. We want to know. Your safety matters. That's good. But now imagine somebody actually does. They tell their manager, I'm exhausted. I don't think I'm fit to perform safely today. What happens next will teach that workforce far more about the culture than the training ever could. If the person is supported appropriately, people notice. If they're made to feel guilty because somebody else has to cover them, people notice. If they're labeled unreliable, people notice. If they experience career consequences later, people notice that too. And very quickly, the workforce learns which message carries more weight. The message from the training or the message from the system. That's why I keep coming back to infrastructure. Culture is reinforced through what happens repeatedly. It's what leaders do when they're under pressure. It's what happens after somebody discloses. It's whether policies and operational realities match. It's whether the organization learns when something isn't working. And it's whether leaders have visibility of what is actually happening across the workforce. This also has a business implication. Think about what organizations spend on training every year. sometimes hundreds of thousands. For large organizations, potentially millions across multiple programs, providers, and regions. If I was sitting on that board, I would want to understand what that investment changed. Did knowledge improve? Yes, that's useful. How about behavior? Are leaders responding differently? Are people speaking up earlier? Has confidence increased? Are teams identifying risks earlier? Are support pathways being used more effectively? Has the organization become better at protecting human performance? Because attendance tells me that people were in the room. Completion rates tell me that they finished the program. But neither automatically tells me that the organization changed. And this connects directly with what we discussed in the previous episode about measurement. We need to be able to follow the investment through. Investment, capability, behavior, outcomes. That is how training becomes part of the performance system rather than a standalone activity. This is also where our HPOS, the Human Performance Operating System, comes into the conversation. When we are working with an organization, training doesn't sit separately from everything else. We want to understand the conditions before we intervene. Where are the gaps? What do leaders currently understand? Where is confidence low? Where are people reluctant to speak up? Where are their weaknesses in support? Where are operational conditions creating human performance risk? That gives us a baseline. The training can be targeted to what the organization actually needs. And afterwards, we measure again. Did confidence improve? Did leadership capability change? Did disclosure readiness improve? Are people experiencing the workplace differently? Are the same risks still appearing? Now, we're not simply saying we delivered the training. We can start showing whether the intervention is moving the organization. And if it isn't, we need to understand why. Maybe the training needs adjusting. Maybe leadership behavior is getting in the way. Maybe workload is overwhelming what people learned. Maybe policy and practice aren't aligned. And maybe there is a trust issue. That's the visibility organizations need. And I think this becomes particularly important in aviation, aerospace, airports, air traffic management, and training environments. These industries already understand competency. We wouldn't train a pilot once and assume capability forever. We assess, we observe, we refresh, we practice, we monitor, we learn from performance. Because competency has to translate into what happens operationally. I believe we need to bring that same discipline into the way we develop human performance capability. If we train leaders in psychological safety, measure whether the environment becomes safer to speak up in. If we train around fatigue, look at whether fatigue reporting and decision-making improve. If we train around mental health literacy, understand whether people recognize concerns and access support earlier. If we train managers around disclosure, measure whether employees trust the disclosure process. That is how training starts becoming infrastructure. So, if you're responsible for learning, safety, people, human factors, or operational performance, I want you to look at the training your organization delivered over the last 12 months. Not to criticize it, look at what happened afterwards. What changed? What can you see now that you couldn't see before? What behavior shifted? What business or operational outcome are you connecting that investment to? And if you can't answer those yet, that's useful information too. Because now you know where the visibility gap is. At Complete Wellbeing Global, this is exactly the direction we're moving organizations towards through our HPOS and our diagnostics. We want organizations to be able to see human performance risk earlier, target interventions more intelligently, and measure whether what they have invested is actually changing the conditions people perform within. Because training absolutely has a place. But training becomes much more powerful when the system around it reinforces what was taught. Build capability. Create the conditions for people to use it. Measure whether behavior changes. Connect that change to organizational performance. That's how you move from training people to building infrastructure. I would love to hear from you if your organization has invested heavily in training over the last few years. What are you measuring afterwards to know whether it actually changed anything? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you're looking at your organization and thinking, we've invested in a lot, but we don't have enough visibility into what's actually working, then connect with us. We can explore how our HPOS and our human performance diagnostics can help you establish the baseline, identify the gaps, and measure what changes over time. Thank you for joining me for this episode at Thrive at the Top. And until next time, lead well, live well, not just survive at the top, thrive. See you in the next episode.